Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Adams. Thank you for joining us for this sort of focused session on budgeting and budget simulation workshop. We're really excited about today's program. We are going to hear from a couple of local government budgeting experts and practitioners. And then we're also hoping to hear from all of you. And then we're also going to take a look kind of behind the scenes on Balancing Act to give you a sense of what it takes to build a Balancing Act simulation. I'm going to share my screen with you. Just a sec here, and go through a few more of the formalities of us getting started. So the plan, as I said, we're going to do a little bit of introductory stuff, and then talk about some challenges and use cases, and hopefully you all will participate in that. We've got two guest speakers, Andrew Sternfeld from the city of Healdsburg, California, and Zack Wolfe, who has had a variety of professional positions in local government budgeting in the US. And then we'll talk about how to build some of these tools. So as I mentioned earlier, we intend this to be a meeting and not a webinar. So the difference being on Zoom webinar that two or three people are identified as the ones that speak and present. But this is actually set up as a meeting. So all of you have the ability to turn your cameras on, to unmute yourself. So please feel free to ask questions directly. I think this is going to be a very exciting session. This is what we heard from you. So we do these sessions periodically and we sometimes ask people, like what comes to mind when you think of the challenges regarding budget simulation and what you wish residents understood about your budget or the type of interaction you'd like to have. And this is a bit of a word cloud that we heard. So engagement just comes up sort of top of line. And I think that's actually a really good sign. And it's probably a little bit of a self-selection too. It's the type of public leader, public administrator, budget leader, city manager who is, I think, attracted to Balancing Act because it really is a tool for good governance. It's a way to not just provide transparency, but to also provide an opportunity for people to participate and sort of understand the difficult challenges that you all face. And I'm going to mute. There we go. Sorry, that's the downside of having this set up as a meeting is that if somebody's got a noisy background, it comes through. But there's this growing sense, I think, among professionals, and it's being pushed by the Government Finance Officers Association, that budget engagement really ought to be seen as a part of how a budget professional does his or her job. And we've been doing a lot of work in the housing sector lately, and it is interesting, partly because of some federal laws like EPA laws that were passed during the 70s. Planners, local government planners, have really had to develop as a core set of skills the ability to do public engagement, and it's been much more of a concern. In budget, it's often much less opaque, and so sometimes the reasons, as I said, are more like reasons of good governance. This is an important thing to do. People ought to understand where the tax dollars are being spent. That folks like yourselves might be interested in doing this, and we think that they're all sort of good. We also think that the role of the budget officer is changing a little bit because there's been this emphasis on transparency now for about 10 or 15 years, and really the next step after you provide information, actually after you provide tools for transparency, people say, well, I want to interact with that. And I think there's a little bit of a generational change that's happening where people are just thinking, okay, I would like to have a convenient way for me to understand the trade-offs and to provide some input on how I think something ought to be solved. So we thought this was an interesting word cloud. But before we go on, I would like to ask you all, if you wouldn't mind, just dropping it. I think we have too many to go around the horn and have everybody introduce themselves. But if you wouldn't mind using chat to just say who you are and who you're with, that would be great. And if you're willing, and I know sometimes it's hard to get the ball started on this, if you wouldn't mind just saying, the challenge that you see, or the way that a city manager a couple of years ago put it to me is, what is it that you wish the public understood about the budget choices that you're making every year? Is there something that just comes to mind? I mean, why is it even of interest to you to have this tool to frame a trade-offs based conversation about your public budget? Anybody? Don't all talk at once? All right, I kind of anticipated. And when you get to a certain size, it becomes a little bit awkward. We're kind of in that middle zone. So, well, that's fine. So I'm gonna, in that case, I'm going to just very quickly demonstrate a new tool. So Andrew Sternfeld is going to be giving a presentation in just a moment, and I want to be sure to get him appropriate introduction because he's really done some great things. And then also Zack Wolfe, as I said, we'll start in just a few minutes. But they're going to be, I think, focusing their comments mostly on our simulation tool, which is the one on the left. But when Garrett comes along towards the end of the session today, he's going to be talking as well about this prioritize tool. So I just want to give you a 90-second overview of the prioritize tool, and then we can launch into Andrew Sternfeld's. So this is a tool that we launched last year. It's one that it's very simple. It's one that's actually been quite popular with our local government customers. It seems like it was tailor-made actually for engagement on ARPA, because what it does is in a very simple way, without really focusing too much on the revenue side, it allows people to understand possible expenditures by a government and then to indicate what they would do. So in this instance, we partnered with Questico, which is, as you might know, it's a major provider of government-purposed budgeting software to come up with a demo. So it says, welcome residents, and then over here, it asks a couple questions, are you a resident, et cetera. And then it uses our standard way of collecting information about where somebody's coming from that doesn't ask their address, but just their zip code. And then it asks them if they would put a pin kind of where they live. And what we love about this tool is that it's so visual. So the idea here is that this local government that we're focusing on here has $1.2 million worth of funds that it can spend, that it wants public input on. In this case, these are all sort of ARPA eligible type things. And currently it's selected none. And so as it goes through and looks at these various tiles, and the thing that we love about this is it's just so darn easy to make. This was literally made in under 2 hours by Garrett Hernandez-Reimer, our Director of Customer Success. As you go through and you select things, it shows how much you selected, shows how much you've got left, and then it shows where you are in terms of a thermometer that gives you a visual on where things are. So you can go through and do things like this. It also provides a way, not just for you, where it's different from a survey in a number of ways. It's very visual, but it also provides an opportunity for you to share information. And so in this case, this bandshell repair talks about why this is on the capital projects list and why it's something that should be a candidate for prioritization with this limited amount of money. And then it also provides this opportunity to present a visualization that gives you more information. So in this case, we've used Questico's Open Book and very simply just plopped a URL on the back end, and you've got this really nice description. You've got some pictures, you've got a map, you've got some, you find out it's ARPA eligible, et cetera. And then you can go through and you can look at some other things like some expenses and kind of whatever they want to put in this tile. But it works also well with Power BI or Tableau, or even just an image, or if you don't have any supplemental information like this, it's really no problem. It doesn't look like something is missing. So let's say that I chose these 4 items or so, and then and I've pretty much spent the amount of money that the local government has asked me to help prioritize. I can then go down here and I can say, okay, of the 4 items that I wanted to include in that fixed amount of money, I think that this is how I'd want to rank order them. And then what that does on the back end is it gives us a really nice way of showing 2 types of information. The first is what would be included and how many times an item was included. That shows up on this top graphic. And then the second one shows the weighted versus the unweighted. And so in this case, it goes roof repair, light poles, pathway. And then if you look at the weighted, it goes pathway, light poles, roof repair. So it's really not that much different, but the order changes a little bit. And then it also gives you this opportunity over here to say, if I were to select, this item, this item, this item, and this item, that would mean that 95.5% of participants in this tool would see at least one of their first choices win, and 79% would see at least 2 choices, et cetera. So there's a lot more that is actually on these analytics, but I'm not going to go too much into that because we'll save that for another day. This is actually the map where where I dropped my pin. This is where this all shows up. But I just wanted to show you that because Garrett's going to be talking about that a little bit more. But now I want to move to what I think is the most important part of this session, and that is to present Andrew Sternfeld, and then after that, Zack Wolfe to you. So Andrew, I hope this doesn't come as uncomfortable for you, but I just want to say you've become a little bit of a folk hero at Balancing Act, because probably the most important issue that we hear, concern that we hear expressed by budget officers and finance directors and city managers and county managers across the country when they think about doing public engagement in general, but even more particularly public engagement on something like budget, is well, how do we get people to participate? And even more particularly, how do we get not just the usual suspects to participate? And so the reason why Andrew's become a folk hero at Balancing Act is that he has a fairly small town, and they've had just outrageously high participation rates if you take it as a percentage of the population of the community. But it's also that he has participation in his Spanish language version that we rarely see even among our clients that have more than 1 million people. A lot of people talk about reaching harder to reach populations. Andrew's actually done it, and it's just been really remarkable. And we talk about you all the time, Andrew, and we're so glad that you're willing to share what you've done with your budget simulation work with this larger group. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you, and I hope that wasn't embarrassing to you.
No, but thank you for the kind words, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today and present to the group. Again, my name is Andrew Sternfeld. I'm going to start my screen share here. Should be seeing this now. As Chris mentioned, I am the Administrative Services Director for the City of Healdsburg. I've been with the city just over a year at this point. And when I came to the city, something that was both important to me and the city manager was finding ways to engage our population in participating in the budget. So to start, for those of you not familiar with where Healdsburg is, we're this little red dot here, about an hour and a half north of San Francisco and an hour and a half west of Sacramento, smack dab in the middle of Sonoma County, in one of the most beautiful wine regions in the world. I encourage you to come visit. If you do, let me know. But we have a small city of about 12,000 people, excuse me. But due to the amount of tourism activity that we have, largely supported by the wine industry, we punch above our weight class. So we have our own municipal golf course, we have our own municipal airport, and we have a community services budget for parks and recreation that probably rivals or surpasses most cities in California and a lot of cities in the country in terms of dollars and funding. So today for the presentation, I just want to cover a couple things. The first is kind of the goals behind our simulation, what we did and why. I'll show you the actual simulation in English and talk a little bit about what we translated over to Spanish and how we made that work, and then really focus on both the results of our simulation and kind of our engagement plan. So we'll start with the goals. We do a 2-year budget here in the city of Healdsburg, and as we're approaching kind of the 2-year budget setting cycle, the city manager and I again decided that we really wanted to dig deep and have a participatory budget process, and for a couple of reasons. One, because historically we've done very little outreach in this town around the budget. Two, as I mentioned, we have a small town, but we have a very engaged population. About 45 to 50% of our residents are seniors, and about 30% of our population is Latino, largely ag workers, and really struggling with housing in a town that's become very expensive for affordable housing due to the tourism industry and a lot of folks owning second homes here. So we really want to dig deep on the engagement side and provide an opportunity for folks to share their feedback, not on just a one-off thing that they're interested in, but on kind of the overall city services and what we're doing, why we're doing it. We also want to create an educational opportunity, and I'm sure this is something many of you experience as well, is that residents often don't understand what it takes to run a city operation, whether it's police or fire, or where their tax dollars go, or what the ability is for the city to generate revenue to fund new services. And so we really wanted to create an opportunity to actually educate the public on the difficult choices that we as administrators have to make and that our elected officials have to make in setting budget and budget priorities. So we went off with kind of that thinking in mind. And as I mentioned, engaging our 30% Latino population was really important to us. So we actually created 2 versions of the same simulation, one in English and one in Spanish. A couple things I will note is that they are 100% the same, like word for word, line for line, dollar value for dollar value, feature to feature. Everything we did in the English version, we did in the Spanish version of the simulation. So starting off on this main page with a video, this is a video we did with our mayor. The Spanish version starts slightly different picture of him to start, but the same exact video, same exact text, only difference is the language. In our actual simulation itself, we started with a balanced budget. We were lucky in this town that we are coming out of COVID in a reasonable position to have a balanced budget. And so we really structured the rest of the simulation based on our spending categories and revenues in a way that would resonate with folks. So we've got our public safety category, which is our police and fire, our community services, which is our parks and rec, and as I'm sure you guys are familiar with, all the other services that are most cities offer. And we have a few specialty category areas down here like diversity, equity, inclusion, which is a topic that's been very important in our community. We also created this Your Ideas function, which I think, Chris, you've since remedied this. I have a new feature out, but we launched before that feature was available. So we created a Your Ideas section where people could actually submit a comment and create their own budget for something that they didn't see that they wanted to see funded. I see most folks aren't from California. So what I will tell you, and maybe it's the same in your state or jurisdiction, but really hard to be a city in California if you want to raise most of the revenues that you receive. We're pretty limited in what we can do. We can't touch property taxes. We have very limited options for sales taxes. And so for each of the revenue categories, we actually took advantage of the feature to lock categories in which residents couldn't raise because legally they couldn't. And so throughout, you can see that we actually kind of built the choices available to our residents to mirror the choices that the council would actually have. And that was really important in our kind of educational mindset of helping residents understand what the city can actually do to raise revenue if it wanted to, and what choices are available to us. So we did that across the board for the revenue sources. You'll notice all of our other revenues, leases, business license fees, all those things are locked because changing those is a process in and of themselves. And we are currently looking at a cannabis tax. So we took the advantage of the opportunity here to actually ask folks about what their support level would be for implementing a cannabis tax, because we would have to go to the voters to implement a tax of that type. So as I mentioned, the Spanish version is exactly the same as the English from start to beginning. We put the simulation out for about 8 weeks, starting in early February and going through to April 1st, basically. And here's the dashboard showing our overall results. We had just under 400 total submissions to the survey. I think 112 of those were in Spanish, and I'll talk about how we did that in just a minute. Windsor's the town just south of us where a lot of folks live who grew up in Healdsburg because they can no longer afford to live here. And so you can kind of see the breakdown. And then we have a lot of second homeowners who live in San Francisco. So they actually picked up here as well, which was kind of nice to see and to be able to cut the data. This dashboard that Balancing Act provides is great for kind of high level demographic data that we were able to provide to council to let them know what areas, who we targeted, were we successful in targeting a population that mirrored our actual population, and they appreciated having this data. But what we also did, and one of the things that I really appreciate this, is we actually downloaded the full data set into Excel and CSV. So we were able to create some really quick pivot tables to look line by line, category by category, to see what changes were made where and why. I'll just preview quickly kind of some of the results we had, and I'll talk about these and why they were important to us. This is a presentation that we provided to council just a few weeks ago, kind of the update. And there's a lot of slides in here we put in on the actual simulation itself, but these are kind of some of the major themes that we pulled out for them. One of them, probably no surprise to folks in this group, is that our residents didn't want to tax themselves more where they could, but they were willing to tax others, particularly our tourists, and raising our transient occupancy tax rate happened much more frequently than looking at other sales tax measures or transfer taxes. We had a really interesting thing happen where when people were looking for funding for their project, the item that was important to them in the budget, they most frequently went to the police operations budget and cut police services. There's lots of different themes or reasons you may want to draw from that. Everything from the fact that most folks don't deal with a police officer unless they're having an emergency, or you could even harken back to what's happening in the last couple of years in policing. We didn't draw a specific theme from that, but it was really interesting to see that was where most folks pull their money. And then, of course, followed by city administration. No one wants to pay for the city manager, city attorney, positions like mine when there's other things they want to fund. What was also really interesting about the results from our simulation was almost in all categories, at least 70% of the residents that took the survey agreed with the current funding level that we would set in the budget. We had a tremendous amount of agreement. And when there was disagreement with whether or not we should fund something more or less, it was almost pretty evenly spread in terms of level of agreement for more funding versus level of disagreement and wanting less funding. So there was a yin and a yang, a push and a pull to almost every spending category, which I think was really helpful for our city council to see, to understand that you may hear this, you may hear that, but 70% of the people are actually right in the middle where we want them to be. And these outside voices are noise, but they're actually coming in equal parts. There's not just the noise on one side saying spend more here, or on the other side saying spend less here. It's actually pretty evenly distributed. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that was really interesting is in our town, and I'm sure this is maybe the case in your city as well, we have a lot of different interest groups, all who have their one thing that they want in the budget. A climate action mobilization plan, pickleball courts, you name it, there's a group for every one thing. And so one of our approaches to handling that was we actually put all of those one-off things in our simulation. So if I go back really quickly, you can see, for example, in city administration, we added Spanish language translation services. In community services, we added money for arts and culture, additional funding. These are all things that different groups in planning and building, general plan update, South Entry area plan, specific plan. We have different groups in town who've been pushing in our city council to fund these things. And we don't have enough money to fund them all, of course, because we never have enough money to fund everything we want to do. And so we asked a lot of these very specific questions about, okay, should we do this? If so, how should we do it? What level of funding should we provide for it? When should we aim to get it done? And the fascinating piece of feedback that we got from that was that, pull this back up real quick. Pretty much every one of those questions received the same level of support. So almost all of them got like 25 to 30% of people saying, yeah, let's do that. And 70% or 75% saying, no, not interested. And so those specific interest groups for all of those things came out to vote for their thing. But there was no consensus. There wasn't like 70% of people who said, we've got to get a general plan done, or we've got to have a climate action plan. It was the specific interest groups coming out and voting for their one thing, and everyone else saying, no, we're good. Having that information validated for our city council was really helpful. Because again, at the end of the day, when they're setting the budget, they've got this long laundry list of things they're hearing from the community. And for them to know that, yes, all of these things are important to a subset, but there's only a handful of things that are really important to everyone, help them hone in on what their priorities are for funding. And so we were able to have some really productive dialogues after this presentation. And actually, I'm going back to council on coming Monday to do our next budget workshop. And all of this data we pulled in is helping in a great way to kind of clarify priorities and plan appropriately, and kind of get rid of the noise that's often out there in public comment land, where you have 6 people coming to your meeting every week talking about the need for pickleball courts. And then you learn, well, really, it's only those 6 people who need them. And so it's been really helpful for us in that respect. I'll touch on one more thing, and then I'll wrap up for questions and whatever else you want to do here, Chris. And let's talk about our community engagement strategy. Lost my screen here real quick, 1 second. So it was really important for us to hit our Latino population in town. Again, we have about 30% of our residents are Latino. They are mostly lower income, mostly ag workers, and definitely struggle with issues of affordable housing. So we partnered with an organization in town. We have a nonprofit in town called Corazon Healdsburg. They're a nonprofit who's basically exists to support the Latino community in Sonoma County, and particularly here in Healdsburg. And we basically asked them to be our partner to get outreach for the survey. And so we said, we'll build the survey, we'll join you, we'll do whatever you think it takes to get out into the community to get people to participate, and we'll be by your side, but we need your help getting the word out. Because they provide a lot of services to our Latino speaking community, there's a lot of trust there, which we found was really important in terms of getting outreach and engagement. So we embarked on a whole series of things. We did 3 community meetings that were co-hosted with Corazon, where they were in English and Spanish, and we literally went line by line through the simulation in Spanish with an interpreter explaining what every category was, answering questions, and having folks with laptops in the room filling out the surveys as we were presenting them. We also did a door-to-door campaign, hitting up our areas of town where we know we have a higher proportion of Latino members of the community living, and went door to door, knocking on doors with iPads in hand, asking folks to fill out the simulation. And then Corazon as a partner was really great in being able to offer daycare services for people to come by their offices so they could fill out the simulation, offering raffle prizes. We did dinner at the community meeting, so folks had food available and daycare if they wanted to come and be able to participate, engage. It was not easy. It took a ton of effort, but it was worth it. It was worth it for a lot of reasons. One, we got feedback from that community that we have not heard before, and voices that typically don't participate in the public process because they don't feel they have access to it. And the things that we learned from that community were incredibly valuable in shaping some of our spending decisions for the upcoming budget. The other thing that we struggled with and that really took a lot of time and attention was the simulation's hard. It's hard for a well-educated, professional person who's in finance. It's hard for me to fill out, right? Because it's tough choices. There's a lot of tough choices that have to be made, and you've got to sift through them and understand how taxes and spending work, and what the impacts of your decisions are. And for our Latino population, the educational gap and like the need for additional assistance and even just understanding what are the city services, like we had this kind of base level of training and understanding that needed to take place just to help those residents understand what is it the city does and why do we spend money on those things and how does that impact them. On the flip side, it created a tremendous opportunity for us to do some outreach on programs we have that are available to those residents who aren't currently taking advantage of them. Utility discount programs, reduced sports fee programs, letting them know what services are out there was also a huge benefit that we wouldn't have otherwise had. So for those reasons, it was tremendously successful, but it was a big lift on our part to kind of get the word out.
That's great. So Andrew, one of the things that I often tell people is that we've done surveys of people who've gone through our simulation, and the number one thing that they say is that was hard. They don't mean that the simulation, that the technology was hard. What they mean is that the trade-offs were hard, and I think that's where the gift is how do you find those public-facing trade-offs that aren't technical, aren't administrative, aren't management, but really have preferences or even a values base to them, and then frame those up so that people can participate and they can see how much those their actions would cost and how it would fit into the whole. So congratulations on really an exemplary presentation. As I said, in terms of your Spanish participation, you rival cities and counties that have 100 times your population. So it's really extraordinary. And I know it's a lot of work, but I'm glad you found it to be worthwhile.
No, thank you. Thank you for the support and feedback. I will say that building the tool was the easy part, right? The tool is very user-friendly, and the data on the back end, once you have it, is, you have basic Excel skills and pivot tables. You can figure out how everyone feels about everything and cross it 10 different ways, which is awesome. It's very easy to use. It really is, though, like most things, building the tool isn't the project. Building the tool is starting the project. It's all the steps you take on the engagement and outreach front to get participation. We probably did 8 or 9 other club meetings with Rotary clubs and Kiwanis Club. Everyone in town who has a club or organization we went and met with, and the push 100% of the time was, here's the simulation, here's why we need you to take it, here's what to do. Creating barcodes for folks and putting them on flyers. We have posters in our town plaza with pictures of the simulation. So there was a lot of other activities we did to really push and get the word out, but it was kind of an all-in affair for city staff. Kind of all agree that this was going to be our focus for a couple of weeks and get the word out every chance we could.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience. We have Zack Wolfe coming up, but are there any quick questions for Andrew before we move on?
Andrew, do you mind sharing just a ballpark of what the contract was with the community-based organization that you partnered with to do the outreach?
So we have an annual contract with them for providing services to the community that this was just included in the scope of work of. Okay. That total contract is like $40,000 a year, and they do stuff year round for us. So this was just like one element of probably 10. I will say we caught a little bit of luck in that one of their organization's major themes for the year was helping their community become more engaged in the public process. And so we were able to partner on that shared value, and that really made it easy to kind of make a win-win for us.
Yeah. And I don't know if anybody really has enough experience to say exactly what the secret sauce is with getting harder to reach populations to participate. But this is the second example we've had where a community-based organization, especially of Latinos, has really driven participation of the simulation. And so I think that is a very promising direction forward, and I'm glad that it worked for you. And we saw in another large Texas city where it was very successful as well. Any other quick questions for Andrew before we move on to Zach? All right, well, we'll try to have a little bit of time at the end. So Zack Wolfe is somebody that found out about us, I think, from a GovTech article when we first launched in 2015. At the time, he was with Maricopa County, one of the largest local governments in the country. And since he has worked in other budget leadership places, including in city of Marion, Iowa. And he's just been a really thoughtful person, who is a public official, who is a public administrator, who's got a very expansive vision for what this type of a tool can be used for in terms of supporting not just public engagement goals, but also internally. And we're really starting to see a lot of interest lately in terms of using the tool internally. So Zach's going to share a few ideas on this. It's a somewhat complicated topic, so we're not going to try to tackle every single thing today, but it's a really compelling vision about how the tool can be used in a lot of different ways. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Zach, and look forward to your comments.
Okay, great. And Chris, do you have the presentation from your end?
I do. Yes, I do. Do you want me to? Okay. Yes.
If you don't mind doing the driving, that would be great.
I don't mind at all. How's that? Can everybody see?
That is perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. The earlier presentation by Andrew set up really well this idea of what is public engagement and really how it's matured over the last 10 years in public administration. Before talking about the internal use of public engagement, I really want to just level set all of us on this new trend that we're starting to look at. GFOA recognizes public engagement, and it's really gone beyond just a supplemental process that we look in the budget process, but really how do we shift our mind around it, or how does this become one of the integral parts that we do in governance? For example, a number of cities are now in their strategic plans, including engagement as one of the key tenets or one of the value statements that they move in there. And I love this quote. It's a reminder to me, as I'll bring up in my section of the presentation today. If you want to go slowly, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And in my story, it begins with Maricopa County. Next slide, Chris. When I worked in the budget office in Maricopa County as a newer budget analyst, I was looking for opportunities to help engage residents and elected leaders, and really looking at public engagement. In my mindset, there were two domains or two groups that really needed to be part of this process. One, make sure we heard the residents' voice so that elected leaders then could make better decisions about where to put their dollars. And the city administrator's office was the one who facilitated that. So I put forth a well-supported proposal to the budget office in Maricopa County saying, there's this great tool balancing act. It's really going to help out our elected officials hear the voice of residents and improve service delivery that we have in Maricopa County. Unfortunately, I was shot down. And it hurt deeply because there were a lot of opportunities I saw that time to listen to the voice of the community. However, Maricopa County at that time, it wasn't the right strategy, and in our maturity curve, we really weren't ready for something as open as a budget simulation tool. So what we ended up doing is we ended up doing two different pieces. We ended up going through some side note projects, but really didn't get to the meat and potatoes of what it is in engagement. Next slide, Chris. So moved over to the city of Marion. City of Marion, much smaller jurisdiction, only about 40,000 residents in the community. City manager gave him the same opportunity statement saying, Lon, how would you like to move forward with balancing act? He said, I love the tool. This is exactly where we want to get with bringing council, bring this information before council, broadening their understanding of the need in the community. But Zach, first you need to go talk to department directors about it. In that process, I thought this would be simple. All I got to do is open up the tool, talk to them about for 15, 20 minutes. Next thing you know, we're going to be kumbayaing through over back to balancing act and setting up our budgets then. But similarly, as we got shot down Maricopa County, I received a lot of staff resistance in talking to department directors about public engagement and what it meant to them. It was one of those moments where the bulb goes off and says, wow, you know what, we're starting a process in which we're looking to listen to residents to see how we can change government, but we really haven't brought staff along in that process. In doing so, it opened my eyes to a couple areas. One, the city departments many times themselves are siloed. So the larger the city, the more silos that go on because the more specialization there's in that area. But many times the Parks and Rec department didn't know the needs of the police department. They knew there were a lot of asks that would go to public safety, and public safety usually get funded, but they didn't really understand what was in there and why. Similarly, across the department, police department didn't understand why there was need for trucks or new staff to come in there. So what we decided to do is we pivoted that year. So rather than going external first, we went internal. So we opened up Balancing Act in the format that Andrew showed a little bit ago, but instead of putting the budget out for the public, we put in there the budget for the previous year, and then we added in all the requests from city staff in there. We scheduled a meeting in which we brought together all the department directors and had them talk about the budget and the areas that they were interested in changing. It was a really great process because in doing so, what we did is we brought more understanding to departments as to, one, what are the needs across the organization? It was one of the challenges actually the city manager put before me as I started in the budget office in the city of Marion. He said, Zach, people see the budget as a black box. They're not sure why we're making the decisions we're making. And at the end, where these investment dollars are going to truly be how we're going to articulate success in the community. It built up cohesion around the budgeting process so that people started saying that it's not just an individual department's budget, but it's actually a city's budget. Anyone in a department silo, you understand at times, you go through the budgeting process given to you by the administrator's office or the budget office, but you don't really see the intersection points that the internal service departments do. So it was a great opportunity to bring people into the fold of what that looked like. Third, one of the areas that really helped us in Marion is we were going through a new strategic planning process, and starting from the ground up performance measurement. We hadn't done that beforehand. So it was a great opportunity too to start showing that performance measures would be part of the groundwork that each department could utilize in communicating not only to their fellow peers, but also across the organization. And thinking of one of the areas Andrew mentioned of how complex it can be of understanding a city budget. One of the things I found is even departments themselves didn't understand what was in another city's or a department's budget and why those dollars were rolled up. Or for example, that about 40% of any new funding that came in the 2022 budget of Marion was already set aside for either automatic increases or mandated increases. So these were areas in moving from an internal perspective that really helped move forward the understanding of what public engagement could look like. Next slide, Chris. So to build on those a little bit more, some of the additional benefits, one of the additional areas is staff also provide budget requests. So the idea behind that, we're asking citizens or residents as to which areas are they interested in putting new dollars into. What we're missing out on one of the opportunities is how does a department think through how to operationalize that and move that forward? In some cases, if there's an initiative that started at the resident level, doesn't go through the department directly and then goes directly to the city council, there may be new initiatives that are somewhat dropped in and then later need to be fit into the budget. Now, previously mentioned, it can strengthen performance management across an organization. And I really see this as one of the important pieces going forward in public engagement. If public engagement, as we're looking to move and make changes to service delivery, the performance management or understanding the feedback from the receivers of the service, the residents is a vital piece in order to strengthen our service delivery models and also to build these evaluation models of not just what are we doing, but then what are we doing over that continuum, and is it bringing back the value we expected? one of the next points of public engagement is about relationships. I can't talk enough about, because the relationship, I think, as Andrew mentioned too, of these community meetings that came forward, and utilizing community partners out there, listen to the community, helps connect different service providers that, one, are many times going to be the conduits for service level delivery that government may not be able to provide or may not be in the best position to provide. Secondly, it reconnects departments with individuals that may have either an issue with government or see opportunities for government. So those relationships, if they only sit at the top of the organization or at the council meetings, they really miss the opportunities for proactive steps of change in government to take place. Leads the next step, which is somewhat I previously mentioned, but the goal of public engagement is to change service delivery. So ultimately, if that service delivery change rests with the departments, the ones that are providing the service, it's imperative that we bring them along in the process. And then lastly, as in the story of Marion, where I thought the first step would really be going external to the organization, I have a new mindset about that. And I believe that actually, if you have enough time, I think there's a lot of value starting inside the organization first and building up the value statements and really working through a change management model of what does public engagement look like across the organization, especially throughout departments, so that departments can be the ones who collect that information and move it through the budget request. So the first time it's not the first time a department's seen this information, but it should complement what they put forward when they're putting requests to City Council. So I appreciate the time today and allowing this perspective to be shared.
Thank you so much, Zach. You know, what you've been saying, I think, resonates with the conversations that I have with budget leaders and city managers, county managers across the country. I think many of them are like Andrew, and they see the value of this to the public, but in some ways, many of them are not ready for it. There's some internal issues that probably seem more pressing. And also, as GFOA pushes its idea of rethinking budgeting, I think the linkage of budget items to performance, I think, is really important. But moreover, I think there's just a sense, and Zach, you and Andrew are really great examples of this, is that budgets are hard things to talk about. They're critically important. They're complex. But if you can create a tool, a conversation tool, a facilitation tool to have those hard conversations, it's really a plus. And Andrew, I think you're among the very best in terms of doing it with the public. And Zach, I think your vision of using it internally to support performance management, rethinking the way that we budget, I think is really coming along. And I don't know if I see Suzanne Slack, who is the Chief Financial Officer at Syracuse City School District. She's on as well. So if we had a Balancing Act Hall of Fame, she would be on there as well, along with Andrew. Their organization, Syracuse City School District, has done a great job with using the tool both externally, but also internally. And when we see internal use of the Balancing Act, it tends to be, it's most often in school districts, to be honest. And my speculation about that is that there is this large group of professionals who are often not focused on administration, i.e. they're teachers, but they still want to have some way of understanding what's going on, understand the trade-offs, and if there is a way for them to provide some input to do so. And so it's nice to see, Suzanne, that you're on as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and then transition back to Garrett. Garrett, you want to probably show your screen, don't you?
Yep. Yeah, that'll work.
Right. Yeah, good. So I love what Andrew said about the building and the simulation wasn't that hard. A lot of times people don't believe us because it looks like it could be fairly difficult. But Garrett's just going to give you a little bit of a peek behind the hood, and then at the end, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions both for Zach and Andrew, or even just some discussion amongst the rest of you.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. So there's really just 5 types of data that you can find within a simulation, and they're categories, subcategories, amounts, more info, and more details. So for categories, if we're looking at just an example of a simulation over here, these categories are color coded on this side, and these are categories for the spending side. In this example, these categories are laid out by departments, but you can also do it by outcomes as well. So those are categories. And then the next type of data is subcategories or subcategories. And this is where the fun is. This is the point of interaction from the user perspective. So if I go back to this example here, I'm going to open up one of the categories, and now you'll actually see that I have 3 categories in this example. I have recreation, I have park maintenance, and then I have parks. And then within subcategories, you do have 2 different ways you can interact with the user. So the first one is something that we call scenario questions. So this is when you just provide a specific question regarding the subcategory, in this case, recreation, and then you actually give them clear-cut options of what they can choose from. And you can actually add amounts to these options here. So when I go through here, changes the balance bar, go through those. And then the other type of interaction that you can do at the subcategory level is just the plus and minus. So you can increase park maintenance, decrease park maintenance, and that's going to all interact with the budget tool. So those are subcategories. And then the next type of data are amounts. So just tied with every subcategory that you have, you'll have amounts tied to them as well. So in this example, again, the park maintenance, that's the subcategory, but the 104,000, that's the amount. So you just want to have your amounts tied to your subcategory options. And then lastly, you'll also have more info and more details. So here's just the ability to provide more context for categories or subcategories. So here I'm looking at Parks and Rec again, and there's this blue little icon. And when a user clicks on that, this actually launches the more information box, and this is text only. And then if I click on more details, this is where you can embed graphics, visualizations, photos, videos, or even just more text. So those are the 5 types of data needed to build a nice simulation. So what I'm going to do next is actually just jump in our admin portal and build one with you guys. So here, the first entry point of data is for revenue. And you can either enter in your revenue or spending data via CSV or just directly manually. So for the sake of time, I'm actually going to import it via CSV. And if it is really easy just to do that one-click CSV import, because if you structure your data just like this, then you're able to, like I just mentioned, just one-click import and it will load everything in there. So here for the CSV import, you'll want to have your header set as category, subcategory, and amount. And again, we're just going back to those 5 types of data, and those 3 are required for CSV import. And then the optional ones are the other 2 types of data that we just covered, the more info and the more details. So going back in here, I have a CSV that's already prepared for my revenue. I'm going to click on import CSV. I'm going to find it. Let's see, revenue budget sim, click open. As you can see, it imports very quickly. And you can see that my categories here were taxes and fines. And then the subcategories were sales, real estate, parking, and traffic. And again, I had my amounts associated with my subcategory items, and then our system just automatically adds those amounts at the subcategory level to your category level. So it's really easy to do that. And then from there, you're able to, edit manually if you'd like as well. Edit subcategory names, amounts, all that. So then the next tab here is spending, and I already have this preloaded. Again, this is just, you import that via CSV or directly. And then also, I'm going to scroll down over here to parks, one of my subcategories. If you scroll over to the right, if you click on this pencil icon here, this is actually going to open up the more info and more details. So if you didn't have it in your CSV, you can again go back and add your text and images in there. And then also, this is underneath the category header, which is just right here, scrolling back down to parks. This is where you can change certain settings and convert to a scenario question. So for the first one, just changing settings of this particular subcategory item, You're allowed to lock certain items. You're allowed to provide alerts. So maybe when someone increases a subcategory item, you're going to provide them with an alert that says, you know what, this might add more traffic to this area if we're building more roads here. You're also able to adjust the change rate. So when people are clicking on that plus and minus, you can do it. You can have that change rate in percentage form or as a fixed increment. And then you're also able to have boundaries as well. So you can set a floor for certain subcategory items and a ceiling. So maybe you don't want someone coming in and defunding an entire subcategory. And you'll be able to prevent that by adding a floor. And then you can even provide a message that says we need X amount of level to have this department running correctly. So those are just ways you can customize it. And then the second one that I just showed you here is the convert to scenario question. That just goes back to that second interaction type that you can do with subcategories. This one right here. So you could easily just not have plus and minus. You can just have the scenario questions there. So now as I'm going through the tabs, the next tab is where you customize or configure your entry and exit screens. And as Andrew presented, he had a really nice, clean entry screen. It had a nice video from the mayor explaining why we need to hear from your input. And yeah, just along those manners. So this is where you can add questions as well. So in this example that I already have, I'm asking, are you satisfied with city services? Maybe you're asking about age range, what gender do you identify as? Just some demographic questions that you can collect that then when a plan is submitted, you're able to tie it back per submission with those demographics, which is great. And then as I scroll down here, this is where Andrew actually customized or configure the entry screen modal. So this is the entry screen intro text. So this is again where you can populate videos, text, links, whatever you want. Then the next tab here is impacts. So impacts is just a good way to kind of specify specific budget items as they relate to certain community priorities. So if you want to show that increasing something on the spending side is going to then contribute to the community priority of equity or getting to carbon neutral, you're able to actually show those impacts directly. And that's something, if you are interested in this, I know we're running short on time. This is something that definitely just reach out to me via email after this and we can go through all that. And then you also see mapping. This was highlighted heavily on our previous breakout session for housing, but you can also use mapping for other infrastructure projects. And then the last tab is just settings. So here you'll have a couple check boxes. Do you want users to comment on their subcategories? Are you okay with social media sharing? Do you want the donut chart, the bar chart, et cetera, et cetera? So then when you click preview here, there's the entry page, entry screen. Scroll down. This is the revenue that we actually added via CSV. There's my category and subcategories, category and subcategories. So that is a very high level of how you can build a simulation. And then I want to take just a couple minutes to go through and show you how you can build a prioritization. So
Hey, Garrett, I'm wondering, I'm a little bit concerned about time. So before you go on to prioritize, I wonder if there are any questions for Andrew or Zach before we close out. Anybody have a question that they want to ask? All right, so maybe I thought there might be some, but I see some in chat. So I'll go ahead and answer them in chat. So Garrett, why don't you go ahead and just give the quick overview on how you make a prioritize.
Perfect. And yeah, and so here, these are the data entry points for your prioritize. You'll have your items, exit and entry screen, just like the simulation tool, and then settings, just like the simulation tool. So here for items, I'm actually going to show you how you can add an item directly, because I had shown you how you can add subcategories and categories via CSV on the simulation tool. So here, it's really easy. This is actually about City Park and how we can improve City Park. So I'm going to go over here and click add an item. I'm going to give an item name. Let's say we want to build soccer fields. You're going to associate a cost with that. Let's say this is going to cost us $45,000. And then as I scroll down here with the tabs, you're going to go to details. This is where you can categorize your item that you're placing in there. And then this, again, thinking back to those 5 types of data, this is where you plug in the more info here. And then the more detail is where you can have videos, links, visualizations, all of that. And then lastly, it's just adding an image to this item. So you can either upload your own image, or we actually have a direct API with a stock photo company. So I can actually just click search here. We'll type in soccer fields, click search, scroll through. You'll actually get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages to select from. We'll go with that one. Click done. And as you can see, it populated right there. And then when you preview, not only are the ones that I had already added are in there, but now soccer fields. And then you can look at the info, more info here, more details, select, select, select.
That's great. Thank you very much, Garrett, for that overview. Any last comments or questions about anything we've covered? As I said, I'm really interested in this idea that Zack has been presenting, and this major trajectory of GFOA of creating facilitation tools that can be used internally as attached to the management process and to help with performance budgeting. Any last comments before we sign off for the day? All right, Zack, how about you? Do you have any comments that you'd like to make? Final comments? Andrew just texted me. He said he had to drop off to go to another meeting. But Zack, anything else from you?
No, except for I'm really excited about the trajectory of what we're looking at public engagement and really bringing into play, making it not just leveling the playing fields for the public, but once again bringing the all levels of staff into the process. And I'd ask each department, as they're going back, how much of the current budget process, if they're not directly related to it, do they feel they understand and their colleagues understand? Because if not, there's definitely an entry point. Even if they're looking to look at simulate external simulations in year one, you really can do a 2-pronged effort to bring in both levels of your organization together at the same time.
One of my, a very notable instance of using Balancing Act was the city of Tacoma, where in 2020, they were in the midst of COVID and they're a sales tax dependent jurisdiction. And they were looking at just a horrible cut based on revenue forecast for sales tax. And the city manager there used the tool internally, I think with about 400 staff before she launched it the next day for the public. And she really thought both of those were important. I think where that's been used internally, I think we've seen a lot of success, and I think those different stakeholders groups are really important, and they can all benefit from a good facilitation tool. So thank you so much for sharing those ideas, Zack. Anything else? All right. Well, we thank you for your interest in Balancing Act and budget simulation and helping to make these tools more useful in a variety of different contexts. Especially grateful for those of you who turned out, because we had said that we were going to be sharing some ideas about how to reach harder to reach populations. And I think that Andrew Sternfeld and the city of Healdsburg was a really terrific example of how it can be done. I kind of love this, that factor of about that he did as well as jurisdictions that have more than 100 times hit the population of Healdsburg. So it really can be done. It's a fair amount of work. But I think in certain jurisdictions and for certain instances, it's critical to do that and probably worth the effort. So anyway, thank you all so much. And we look forward to staying in conversation with you about how to make these tools more and more useful to face the challenges that you face. All right, thank you. Bye.